The tale begins in a world where marble whispered secrets, and chisel strokes echoed like heartbeats longing to be heard. This was not merely the realm of craftsmanship, nor the sterile halls of stone and dust. It was a place where desire itself clung to the air, where the sculptor's hand became a lover's caress upon unyielding surfaces, and where the silence of statues trembled with the weight of yearning. In this world, beauty was not an accessory, not a fleeting adornment for the eye, but a religion, devoted, absolute, consuming. Art did not exist to be admired alone. It existed to provoke hunger, to stir something primal beneath the skin, to awaken the thirst for more than what the human form could offer. Here, marble was not cold, not dead, but a promise of something greater. In the curve of a hip, in the poised tilt of a chin, in the line of a sculpted mouth that seemed on the verge of speaking, one could glimpse the threshold between reality and dream. And it was at this threshold that the myth of Pygmalion was born. Before there were names, there was longing. A longing so fierce it stripped away the ordinary, leaving behind only obsession. The sculptor's world was drenched in this obsession, for he was surrounded by imperfections he could not forgive. Flesh betrayed itself, beauty faded, voices lied, hearts deceived. Only stone seemed incorruptible. Only in the silence of marble could perfection be carved, held, and worshipped. The myth unfolds within this tension between the imperfection of life and the imagined purity of creation. It is said that marble was once born of mountains, pressed and shaped by time into veins of white, streaked with faint grays like the brush of breath on skin. In the sculptor's hands, these veins became the very pulse of desire. Every strike of the chisel was not destruction, but awakening. Every fragment that fell away was not loss, but revelation. Out of the weight of stone, he sought to free something more perfect than life itself. Beauty that could never betray, never decay. And yet, what is beauty if it cannot return a gaze? What is love if it lies imprisoned in silence? The story of Pygmalion is not simply about a man and his statue. It is about the dangerous seduction of ideals, about the intoxicating madness of chasing a vision beyond flesh and bone. It asks, is perfection a blessing or is it a curse? Can the heart find fulfillment in a dream so flawless it denies the very essence of humanity? Or does the soul crave imperfection, the warmth of flaws, the sweetness of fleeting mortality? The myth invites us into a paradox. On one side lies the sculptor's yearning to touch beauty untouched by time, to hold purity that never withers. On the other side lies the truth of existence, that to live is to change, to love is to risk, to desire is to ache. Between these two poles stretches a chasm filled with longing, and it is across this abyss that the sculptor's heart wanders. Yet, this is no tale of cold abstraction, It is sensual in its marrow, burning with textures and sensations. Imagine the weight of marble beneath fingertips, smooth, cool, resisting, yet shaped with such intimacy it becomes more familiar than flesh. Imagine the quiet ecstasy of seeing form emerge where once there was only rough stone, a shoulder revealed like dawn breaking, a mouth sculpted as if to sigh, a thigh curving as though meant to rest in the hollow of an embrace. Creation in this myth is not a labor of tools alone. It is a lover's ritual, as sacred and as fevered as the act of love itself. And in this ritual lies the danger. For when the sculptor leans too close, when his breath grazes the lips he carved, when his nights are haunted by the image he birthed, reality begins to fray. The statue ceases to be a statue. She becomes presence, silence thick with unspoken promises, absence that aches like an open wound. He begins to dream, not of finishing his work, but of awakening her, of feeling warmth bloom where marble chills. Desire coils tighter with each caress of the chisel until even the gods cannot ignore its flame. This is where the myth seduces us, not with resolution, not with the promise of happy union, but with the raw intensity of the longing itself. The sculptor's devotion reveals something universal, that beauty, once glimpsed, cannot be forgotten, and that desire, once ignited, refuses to remain contained. He does not simply sculpt a statue. He sculpts his hunger, his loneliness, his unspoken prayers. In her form lies everything he has ever sought but could never hold. Such longing is familiar to us all. It may not take the shape of marble and chisel, but we too know what it is to yearn for what feels beyond reach, a lover's touch withheld, a dream forever delayed, a perfection glimpsed only in memory or imagination. We have all felt that exquisite torment of desiring what the world refuses to give. And so, even before the statue breathes, before divine fingers stir her into life, we already know her. She is every dream unfulfilled, every beauty untouched, every kiss we have ever ached to taste, but never could. The myth, in its introduction, does not rush us toward miracle. Instead, it lingers in the tension, teaching us to savor the ache of desire. For desire is its own intoxication, its own form of closeness. The sculptor, in his solitude, is not truly alone. His creation fills the silence, saturates the air, becomes the companion of his heart even before she awakens. And here lies one of the myth's truths. Sometimes love exists not in the consummation, but in the dream, in the tender cruelty of yearning. Yet the gods, who watch with eyes that pierce beyond flesh, recognize this yearning. They know that creation is never neutral. To sculpt is to worship. To love perfection is to call upon forces larger than oneself. And when longing reaches such intensity that it burns brighter than prayer, brighter than sacrifice, it becomes impossible to ignore. The sculptor's devotion does not vanish into the void. It reverberates, echoing across heavens and hearts alike until it demands response. Thus, the myth begins not with love fulfilled, but with love suspended in its most intoxicating form. Unattainable, flawless, aching. It is in this suspended moment where marble trembles on the edge of becoming flesh, where silence strains toward a first word, that the stage is set. Here we stand at the threshold of a miracle, uncertain whether it will be gift or curse. And so the introduction closes upon a world drenched in marble and longing, a world where creation and desire entwine so tightly they become indistinguishable. The sculptor's chisel is not just a tool, but an extension of his heart. The statue is not just stone, but the embodiment of his hunger. And somewhere, hidden in the stillness of gods who watch, lies the spark that will decide whether beauty remains untouchable dream or awakens into perilous, intoxicating life. In every myth, there comes a moment when the silence of the world bends, and figures emerge from shadow into light, taking form not merely as names, but as living embodiments of desire, fear, and hope. In the tale of Pygmalion, these figures are few, yet their presence fills the stage so completely that no others are needed. The sculptor, the statue, and the goddess whose unseen hand will stir destiny, three souls bound by longing, creation, and the trembling balance between dream and reality. Pygmalion stood at the heart of this story, a man of exquisite skill and tormented vision. To the world he was a craftsman, a master of stone whose hands could coax from marble shapes so pure they rivaled the gods' own handiwork. Yet within him there burned something far more dangerous than skill: disillusionment. He had gazed upon the world of flesh, upon the faces of women who whispered lies with lips painted in fleeting beauty, upon the endless games of vanity and betrayal that paraded through the streets. What he found there was not purity, not devotion, but corruption and deceit. His heart recoiled, turning away from flesh that rotted, voices that deceived, embraces that betrayed. For Pygmalion, real love was already dead. What remained alive within him was hunger, sharpened into obsession for a beauty that could not betray, a form that would never falter. He was not merely a sculptor of marble, he was a sculptor of ideals, chiseling away at imperfection with every blow of his tool. The world might call him aloof, might call him cold, but in truth, he burned with a passion too fierce to be satisfied by reality. Only marble, silent and incorruptible, could bear the weight of his devotion. And yet, as much as he fled from the living, he was not free of longing. Within him stirred a desire deeper than flesh, more fevered than lust. He longed for beauty so radiant it transcended life itself, beauty so flawless it seemed born of divinity. He longed not for touch alone, but for intimacy with perfection, for a union with something unsullied, untouchable, eternal. This paradox defined him, a man who turned from love yet yearned for it more than any other, a man who rejected imperfection yet sculpted his entire existence around the dream of an embrace unmarred by flaw. And then there was the statue, Galatea. Though the name would only be given later, in the fullness of her awakening, already she existed in spirit as he began to carve. She was born first as an idea, then as a shape emerging beneath the sculptor's hands, until finally she stood before him, a silent muse who embodied all he had ever dreamed. She was the culmination of every disappointment and every hunger, the answer to every unspoken prayer he had never dared to voice aloud. In her form lay the distilled essence of desire. Each curve was shaped not only by chisel, but by longing. Each contour was smoothed not only by touch, but by yearning. Her lips were parted just enough to suggest the promise of a sigh. Her gaze lowered as though lost in secret thought. Her body poised in that perfect tension between innocence and invitation. To any other, she would have been a statue. An extraordinary work of art, yes, but stone nonetheless. To Pygmalion, she was more than marble. She was the vessel of his heart, the mirror of his obsession, the dream made fleshless flesh. Galatea, in her silence, possessed a strange power. She did not speak, and yet she commanded his nights and haunted his days. She offered nothing, yet gave him everything: purpose, devotion, the illusion of intimacy that fed his soul even as it tormented him. She was not alive, yet she lived in him, for in the sculptor's gaze she had already transcended stone. She was not passive, not truly. In the hush of the workshop, in the stillness of flickering lamplight, she seemed to breathe. She seemed to wait. She seemed to ache as much as he did, though her lips never parted to confess it. It was this silence that made her irresistible. For in silence she could not betray. In silence she could not wound. She became the perfect beloved, untouched by the cruelties of human voice and human choice. And yet the very perfection that enraptured him also cut him to the bone. For every night he lay awake, longing for her warmth, and every morning he awoke to the chill of marble beneath his hands. Beyond them both, in realms where mortal eyes could not reach, another presence lingered. Aphrodite, goddess of love, beauty, and desire, watched with eyes both tender and amused. Hers was the dominion of passion, the power to ignite longing in the hearts of mortals and gods alike. To her, the sculptor's devotion was no ordinary act. His prayers were not offered in temples, not spoken with words, but carved into the very marrow of marble. His longing was not fleeting lust, but a fire that consumed his solitude, an intensity that rivaled worship itself. Though Pygmalion did not yet call upon her name, he had already entered her domain. For what is love, even in silence, if not a hymn to Aphrodite? What is longing so fierce it bends the boundaries of reality, if not a prayer she cannot ignore? She hovered unseen, her presence like a shimmer in the air, waiting, measuring, amused by the paradox of a man who despised women, yet sculpted the image of one more perfect than any mortal. It was she who understood what Pygmalion himself could not, that desire cannot be caged forever. It demands release, demands transformation. And so, though silent for now, Aphrodite's gaze rested upon the sculptor and his statue, preparing to weave her unseen thread into their tale. For love, even unspoken, is never ignored by the goddess who governs it. Thus the stage was set. The sculptor, haunted by perfection and disillusioned by life. The statue, silent muse and vessel of impossible desire. And the goddess, unseen but inevitable, waiting to entwine mortal longing with divine response. 3 figures, each bound to the others, each necessary for the unfolding of the myth. And yet, even here at the beginning, their roles were not fixed. Was Pygmalion master or prisoner of his own creation? Was Galatea victim of stone or sovereign of the heart that adored her? Was Aphrodite benevolent patron or mischievous trickster delighting in mortal folly? The answers lay hidden in the story's unfolding. But for now, it was enough to know them, to see Pygmalion in his solitude, hands dusted with marble, eyes burning with devotion no living woman could claim. To see Galatea in her silence, lips still stone, yet heavy with promise, a figure that seemed always on the verge of waking. And to feel, unseen yet palpable, the weight of Aphrodite's gaze upon them both, a promise of transformation, of danger, of passion yet to come. These were the characters of the tale, the dreamer, the dream, and the divine hand that would decide whether dream and dreamer might ever meet. Their story was not yet resolved, but already it throbbed with tension. Already it pulsed with longing, and in that tension lay the essence of myth. Beauty, desire, and the perilous hope that love might awaken even stone. Obsession begins quietly, like the faint hum of a string before it is plucked, a vibration so soft it seems harmless. For Pygmalion, it began with the simple act of stepping back from his work to gaze upon it, his chisel hanging loose in his fingers, his breath caught at the sight of what his own hands had conjured from stone. At first it was pride, the satisfaction of an artist beholding mastery. But pride ripened swiftly into something heavier, something hungrier. What stared back at him from the marble was not just a statue. It was perfection embodied, beauty distilled so purely it mocked the imperfection of flesh and blood. Day after day, he lingered in her presence long after the tools were laid aside. He told himself it was study, the artist's duty to examine his work. Yet the truth pressed against him, undeniable. He could not look away. Every curve of her body, every delicate fold of stone where fabric seemed to cling to her skin, every faintly parted lip that invited imagination. It was too much. She eclipsed all memory of living women, all flawed faces, all fragile loves that had disappointed him before. Flesh rotted, but marble remained. Passion faded, but this beauty did not falter. In her he found a devotion to perfection that the world had denied him. The sculptor's touch changed. At first it was the touch of an artist, smoothing roughness, coaxing form from resistance, but now it lingered too long, hovered too gently. His palm would glide along her cheek as though testing warmth that was not there. His fingertips brushed her lips as though waiting for breath that never came. Sometimes he pressed his forehead to hers, closing his eyes, pretending, just for a moment, that stone could answer. Words, too, crept into the silence. He spoke to her, at first in whispers too soft to hear, as though ashamed of himself. But the silence of the workshop welcomed his voice, and soon he poured confessions into the air that only she could hold. He told her of his loneliness, of the ugliness he saw in the world, of his despair at hearts that lied and lips that deceived. And always his voice softened when he turned to her, for she was different, she was pure, flawless, incorruptible. She was what he had sought all along. He named her, not yet with words, but with gestures. He draped her in silks, fine fabrics that slid across her shoulders and gathered at her waist, though she could not feel their softness. He placed jewels at her throat, bracelets on her wrists, rings upon her rigid fingers, adorning her as a bride. At her feet he laid gifts, flowers whose petals wilted quickly against the eternal marble, fruits whose sweetness rotted in the heat, treasures that only mocked him by their transience. And yet he offered them still, as though some part of him believed she would see, she would know, she would respond. Nights grew restless. He dreamt of her, not as stone, but as woman, her lips parting in breath, her eyes lifting to meet his, her hands closing gently around his wrists. In the dream, she moved, and her movement was the undoing of his soul. He woke each time with a shuddering ache, his chest hollow with yearning. And though each morning revealed her unchanged, still, silent, cold, the dream never left him. It grew heavier, pressing against his ribs until waking and dreaming blurred, and he no longer knew whether he was the sculptor or the prisoner of the form he had created. The conflict raged within him. On one side was reason, whispering cruel truths. She is stone. She cannot love you. She cannot move. She cannot return the fire that burns within your veins. On the other was desire, louder, fiercer, intoxicating. But look at her, touch her, feel the perfection beneath your hands. Is this not love, more profound than the flawed embraces of mortal women? Why should stone deny him what he had already poured into her with every strike of the chisel? The torment lay in her silence. He ached for a word, a sigh, a glance, anything to tell him he was not alone in this madness. But each time he pressed his lips to hers, each time he wrapped her in garments of softness, each time he bent his body against hers in desperate embrace, the silence remained. She gave nothing, and yet in her refusal she gave him everything. For silence is not empty, it is a canvas for longing, and Pygmalion filled it with the echoes of his own desire. The city whispered of him. They said the sculptor had gone mad, that he spent his days and nights with a statue, that he no longer sought companionship or even conversation among the living. They laughed at his folly, at his refusal to look upon real women, at his devotion to marble breasts and lips that would never kiss. But Pygmalion did not care. Their mockery was the chatter of insects, insignificant against the vast cathedral of silence that enveloped him and his beloved. He needed no one else. He had her.
Yet solitude has sharp teeth, and longing can devour even as it sustains. The more he gave himself to her, the more he realized how hollow he had become. His body ached with unfulfilled touch, his chest with unspent love. Each caress against stone only deepened the hunger. Each whisper into her silence only amplified the echo of his loneliness. He stood suspended between ecstasy and despair, a man blessed and cursed in the same breath, for he possessed perfection, but not its soul. He held beauty, but not its warmth. He had shaped desire itself, but not love. There were moments, brief, fevered moments, when he wondered if he should destroy her, if one strike of the hammer might free him from this torment. Better to shatter marble than to live shackled to the ache of what could never be. But even as the thought rose, his hand faltered. He could not bring himself to harm her. To lose her would be to lose the only light left in his world. And so the conflict raged on. Destroy her and be free, or keep her and remain forever enslaved. It was in this torment that his prayers began to form, not formal words, not offerings in temples, but prayers born of desperation. When he closed his eyes, he whispered into the void, "Let her live, let her breathe, let her touch me once." He did not name the goddess, but already his yearning reached Aphrodite's ears. For desire itself is a prayer, and longing that consumes the soul cannot remain unheard. Thus Pygmalion stood upon the edge of despair, his heart torn between the perfection he adored and the impossibility of possessing it. His hands trembled against marble that would not soften. His lips lingered upon stone that would not respond. His gifts piled before feet that would not move. Love, when unanswered, is agony. But when it clings to perfection, it is worse, for there is no flaw to weaken its hold. He was trapped, prisoner of his own creation, chained by a beauty that both exalted and destroyed him. This was the conflict that defined him, the impossible desire for what he himself had brought into being, and the unbearable torment of knowing it could never be his. It was in this tension, in this exquisite torment, that the myth of Pygmalion deepened. And it was here, in the heart of obsession, that the goddess of love prepared to intervene.
There comes a moment when desire, pressed too long against silence, grows so vast it can no longer remain contained. For Pygmalion, that moment arrived not in a blaze of sudden ecstasy, but in the quiet breaking of his own restraint. He had tried to live with the torment of his creation, touching, caressing, adorning, whispering, but desire is a flood, and floods always seek to break their banks. One night, as the air lay heavy with heat and silence, he sank to his knees before her. The statue loomed above him, luminous in lamplight, her marble skin glowing with a radiance that mocked the living. He pressed his forehead to her thigh, his breath scattering across stone that refused him. His hands trembled as they slid down the line of her body, over the hardness of her hips, down the delicate ridges he himself had carved with devotion. "Please," he whispered, not to her, not to marble, but to the void itself. His voice cracked with desperation. "If there is a God who listens, hear me. Do not let me drown in this torment. I have given everything. I have poured myself into her. I love her, though she is stone. Let her live. Let her love me." The prayer was not eloquent, not adorned with offerings or ritual. It was raw, stripped bare of pride, a man surrendering to the very thing he had once scorned. He had mocked the flaws of mortals, turned away from their imperfection, yet now he begged for a miracle greater than any mortal could imagine. His devotion had carved more than marble. It had carved open his own heart, leaving it raw, unguarded, trembling at the feet of what he had created. His lips brushed hers, cold. His hands cradled her face, pressing his cheek against hers, unyielding. He closed his eyes, surrendering everything, pride, sanity, even hope, to that final desperate embrace. And then something shifted. It began almost imperceptibly, a warmth so faint he thought it a dream. His lips, pressed to hers, felt not the chill of stone, but the whisper of softness. His palms, cupping her face, no longer rested against lifeless marble, but against something pliant, tender. He pulled back, breath caught in his throat, eyes wide with terror and wonder. Her skin, where stone had been, glowed faintly, as though fire smoldered beneath its surface. He pressed his hand again to her cheek. Warmth, not imagined, not dream, but true warmth, spreading outward like sunlight through dawn. He staggered back, fear mingling with awe. The air in the chamber grew thick, fragrant, heavy with a sweetness that did not belong to earth. The flicker of lamplight bent strangely as though unseen fingers stirred it. In that silence he felt her presence, Aphrodite. She did not appear in thunder, nor in the blaze of heavenly armies. She appeared in the simple, undeniable truth of transformation, in the answering of a prayer that had burned too hot to be ignored. Pygmalion's heart thundered as he reached again for her. Her lips parted, not in a sigh, not yet, but with the faint tremor of breath. Marble had no breath, stone did not swell with air. But now beneath his trembling fingers her chest rose and fell, tentative, fragile, miraculous. A pulse fluttered at her throat, faint as the wings of a moth, yet steady, undeniable. He gasped, falling against her, his hands exploring with reverence and disbelief. Her hair, once carved in rigid curls of stone, slipped like silk through his fingers. Her arms, once lifeless, quivered as though testing their own weight. Her eyes, closed for so long, flickered beneath their lids, restless with the stirring of a soul not yet awakened. Galatea! The name tumbled from his lips unbidden, as though it had always belonged to her. He whispered it again, his voice breaking. Galatea! Her eyelids lifted, slowly, trembling, uncertain. They revealed eyes that shimmered not with the blankness of stone, but with the unguarded light of life. They met his gaze, not with the perfection of stillness, but with the vulnerability of the living. In that imperfection, in that fragile awakening, she became more beautiful than stone could ever hold. Pygmalion wept. The tears fell unchecked as he pressed his face to hers, his body trembling with relief, fear, ecstasy. He kissed her, truly kissed her, and this time lips parted, warmth meeting warmth, breath mingling with breath. She tasted not of marble, not of dust, but of sweetness, of life itself. It was more than he had dared to dream, more than his longing had promised him.
Her hands rose, hesitant, weak, but alive. They touched his shoulders, his hair, his face, as though she too could not believe what she felt. Fingers traced the lines of the man who had made her, who had prayed her into being. And though she could not yet speak, her touch said everything. She was his, and he was hers. Around them the air hummed with Aphrodite's unseen laughter, her blessing woven into the fabric of the moment. For this was her gift, not just perfection made flesh, but desire answered, love granted where none had seemed possible. Pygmalion had rejected the world, but the goddess of love had given him one who belonged to no other, one who was both his creation and her miracle. The transformation was not abrupt, but gradual, sensual, every heartbeat another unveiling. He traced her arms, once rigid, now pliant and soft. He pressed his hands to her back, feeling the warmth gather like ambers beneath her skin. He kissed her throat, where pulse fluttered wildly, fragile yet alive. And with every touch, her body grew more certain, more alive, more wholly hers.
Their embrace was not the frenzy of conquest, but the trembling ecstasy of lovers meeting for the first time. Every brush of lips, every clasp of hands, every shared breath was drenched in reverence, in disbelief. The sculptor and his statue, once separated by silence and stone, now lay entwined in the miracle of flesh. For Pygmalion, it was not only desire fulfilled, it was salvation. His loneliness, his torment, his exile from the world of love, all of it dissolved in her gaze. He had created perfection, but it was Aphrodite who had breathed soul into it, who had reminded him that love was not about flawless form, but about surrender, vulnerability, and the miracle of being answered. The moment stretched timeless, as though the world had stilled to witness. The sculptor and his beloved clung to each other, trembling, weeping, laughing, kissing, unable to believe, yet unable to doubt. In their union, marble had become flesh, and flesh had become divine. This was the climax of their story, not merely the miracle of transformation, but the ecstasy of touch returned, of desire no longer unanswered. Pygmalion's prayers, whispered in desperation, had risen to Aphrodite's ears, and the goddess had answered, not with judgment, but with mercy. Where once there had been stone, now there was woman. Where once there had been silence, now there was breath. Where once there had been longing, now there was love. Galatea's breath steadied. No longer the fragile flutter of first awakening, but the rhythm of a woman alive. A woman whole. Her chest rose and fell with quiet assurance, each inhalation drawing her further from the world of silence and into the world of flesh. She blinked, her lashes trembling like the wings of a bird testing flight for the first time. And when her eyes opened fully, they met his. It was not the gaze of stone, blank and unchanging. It was the gaze of life itself, liquid, luminous, uncertain yet filled with wonder. For a long moment, neither spoke, though only one of them had ever been capable of speech before. Their silence was richer than words, heavy with awe, disbelief, and a tenderness so deep it seemed to reach beneath the skin. Pygmalion's lips parted, but his voice faltered. What words could capture what lay before him? His creation, his dream, his impossible desire, alive, breathing, gazing back at him with eyes that mirrored his own longing. He had sculpted perfection, but in this moment she was more than perfection. She was real. Galatea, he whispered again, reverently, as though naming her drew her more firmly into being. At the sound of his voice, her lips curved, not into the fixed smile he had once carved, but into something fragile, trembling, alive. A smile born not from design, but from feeling. She raised her hand slowly, uncertainly, and touched his face. The gesture was halting, like a child's first step, yet filled with infinite tenderness. Her fingers traced his cheek, marveling at warmth, at the texture of skin, at the miracle of being able to touch and be touched. Pygmalion closed his eyes, overcome. The world had narrowed to her hand against his face, her eyes gazing into his own, her breath mingling with his own. In that single moment, he knew he would never again look upon the world the same way. No perfection in marble, no form carved from stone could rival the living beauty of her smile, the vulnerability in her touch. Their lips met once more, not in desperation this time, but in reverence. His kiss was soft, lingering, tasting the miracle of her existence. Her lips responded, hesitant at first, then with growing certainty. It was the kiss of discovery, of a soul testing the boundaries of flesh, of a woman awakening not just to life, but to love.
She leaned into him, her body warm and pliant against his, no longer the chill hardness of marble, but the supple form of living desire. He wrapped his arms around her, drawing her close, trembling with both passion and disbelief. Their embrace was no longer sculptor and statue, but man and woman, bound together by a miracle that blurred the line between dream and reality. Around them, the chamber seemed to glow with a subtle radiance, as though unseen eyes watched with approval. It was Aphrodite, ever present though unseen, her blessing woven into the threads of their union. For she had heard his plea, felt the purity of his devotion, and answered not with scorn, but with generosity. She had breathed life into his creation, not to mock him, but to teach him. Love, when true, transcends boundaries. Galatea's body moved with the rhythm of her newfound life. Her hands explored him, tentative yet eager, learning what it meant to be alive through the shape of him, through the texture of skin, through the warmth of his breath. Every touch was discovery, every caress revelation, and Pygmalion, overwhelmed, guided her gently, reverently, as though afraid she might vanish if he held too tightly. Yet she did not vanish. With every heartbeat, she grew more real, more certain. Her laughter, soft and uncertain, filled the chamber when his trembling hands brushed her hair from her face. The sound struck him harder than any prayer, sweeter than any melody, for it was the sound of a soul that had never existed before. He wept again, though now his tears were not of sorrow, but of joy so vast it could not be contained. He pressed his forehead to hers, his breath mingling with hers, whispering words of devotion he had never spoken to any mortal woman. And though she had no words yet, her eyes answered, her touch answered, her very existence answered. Their passion, once confined to the cold embrace of stone, now flowed freely, alive and mutual. He kissed her shoulders, her throat, her hands, marveling that they yielded, that they trembled under his touch. She gasped softly, each sound a new miracle, each shiver proof that she was not dream, but reality. The union of creator and creation was not a conquest, but a communion. He had given her form, but now she gave him meaning.
In her gaze, he was no longer the lonely sculptor who had turned from flawed humanity. In her arms, he was beloved. His devotion had found its echo, his desire its answer. Aphrodite's presence lingered, unseen yet undeniable. The fragrance of roses seemed to drift faintly through the air, and the flicker of lamplight caressed their bodies with warmth beyond fire. The goddess had blessed this love, not only by granting life, but by sanctifying the bond that now united them. Their union was not theft, not defiance, but gift. Galatia's lips parted, and though her voice was faint, unformed, she managed a single word. It was not his name, not yet, but a sound, soft, fragile, filled with yearning. It was the first sound she had ever made, and it was for him. Pygmalion answered with a sob, pulling her close, his heart breaking open with gratitude. They lay together in that sacred space, sculptor and beloved, creation and creator, no longer divided. Every kiss was a prayer, every caress a hymn, every breath a testament to the miracle they shared. Their passion was not only the fulfillment of desire, but the consummation of devotion, the sealing of a love so pure it had moved a goddess to act. As dawn's first light touched the horizon, the glow of Aphrodite's blessing seemed to linger upon them. It was said that the goddess herself smiled upon their union, delighting in the love that had blossomed from longing and devotion. For in granting Galatea life, she had not merely rewarded Pygmalion's desire, she had elevated it, transformed it into something greater. Pygmalion held Galatea in his arms, his heart overflowing with awe. He whispered to her that she was no longer his creation alone, but his beloved, his partner, his equal. She answered with her eyes, luminous with tenderness, and with the simple act of holding him tighter. In that embrace, they knew they had crossed the threshold from dream into reality, from yearning into fulfillment. The outcome of their story was not the end, but a beginning. The sculptor no longer alone in his studio, the statue no longer bound to stone. They were two souls entwined, their love sanctified by the goddess of passion herself. And in their union, the world was reminded that love, true love, is both gift and miracle, capable of defying boundaries, capable of breathing life into the lifeless.
Stories such as this are not told merely to recount miracles, but to remind us of what lies at the heart of human longing. Pygmalion's tale lingers not because of marble shaped into flesh, but because it reveals something that dwells within us all, the desperate, unyielding hunger to give life to our desires, to make real what seems impossible. From the beginning, he was a man estranged from the world, disappointed in love's fragility, repulsed by imperfection. Yet what he sought in rejection, he found in creation.
The sculptor who shunned the warmth of living women sought instead the cold perfection of stone. And in that pursuit, in his devotion and obsession, he revealed a truth larger than himself. The human soul is never content with shadow. It yearns to breathe life into its dreams. Desire and imagination, these are the twin forces that shaped Pygmalion's fate. His hands carved Galatea from marble, but it was not skill alone that made her extraordinary. Countless statues had been carved before, yet none had provoked the gaze of a goddess. What set her apart was the fervor with which he adored her, the way his longing filled the silent spaces between stone and soul. His imagination built her form, but his desire gave her essence. Here lies the paradox. Obsession can consume, devour, and isolate, yet it can also transcend, transfigure, and summon miracles. Pygmalion's devotion to Galatea teetered upon that line. He caressed cold stone with the tenderness of a lover. He whispered to lips that would not respond. He offered gifts to hands that could never accept them. To some, this might seem madness, and perhaps it was. But within his madness lay a purity, an intensity so raw it caught the ear of Aphrodite herself. Was it obsession or devotion? Perhaps both, for the two often walk side by side. Obsession without tenderness hardens into possession. Devotion without intensity fades into forgetfulness. But when the two meet, when passion is fierce yet filled with reverence, it can pierce the veil between mortal and divine. It can awaken gods to pity and stir miracles from silence. The sculptor's longing reveals another truth. Art is never merely about form. To shape stone, to paint canvas, to compose melody, these are acts of desire, acts of yearning to touch what cannot otherwise be touched. Pygmalion did not create Galatea to display her in galleries, nor to impress with his mastery. He created her because he needed her, because within the hollows of his chest beat a hunger that could not be silenced by empty admiration. In this he became more than an artist. He became a man who sought not beauty alone, but communion.
And when Aphrodite answered, it was not only Pygmalion who was transformed, but the very idea of creation itself. His story reminds us that to create is to pray, and to love is to risk madness. Desire, when poured wholly into imagination, does not remain confined. It spills over, reaching for something greater, daring the gods themselves to listen. Yet the tale does not encourage blind surrender to obsession. There is danger in loving what cannot love you back, danger in pouring your soul into silence. Pygmalion's torment was proof of this. The nights he spent pressing his lips to marble, begging for response that never came. His suffering warns us of the abyss into which unchecked longing can fall. But the blessing that followed reminds us also of love's strange mercy. Even when we lose ourselves to desire, even when we teeter on the edge of ruin, there is a possibility, rare, miraculous, that the world may answer. At its heart, this myth speaks not only of a sculptor and his statue, but of us all. For who has not looked upon something lifeless, a dream, a hope, a vision, and wished it could breathe? Who has not whispered into silence, yearning for an answer? The ache of Pygmalion belongs to every heart that has ever longed beyond reason, every soul that has ever dared to love what seemed unreachable. Galatia's awakening is more than miracle, it is metaphor. She embodies the truth that love, when deep enough, can awaken the lifeless, can transform the cold and unyielding into warmth and response. We may not sculpt marble into lovers, but we know what it is to see beauty in what others call empty. We know what it is to pour ourselves into creation, into relationships, into hope, and to believe that with enough devotion, the still may stir, the silent may answer, the impossible may live. The divine presence of Aphrodite reminds us too that love is never ours alone. It belongs to something greater, something vast and unseen. Love is the language of gods and mortals alike, the bridge between desire and miracle. When we surrender wholly to it, when we risk our pride and pour ourselves into its embrace, we touch upon the eternal. And so, Pygmalion's tale closes not in solitude, but in union. His dream did not remain confined to stone. It walked beside him, breathed beside him, loved beside him. His obsession was transformed into devotion, his despair into fulfillment, his art into life. From his yearning came a truth that endures, that love has the power to animate even what seems lifeless, to breathe warmth into coldness, to answer silence with song. What then is the lesson of Pygmalion and Galatea? That imagination and desire are not to be feared, but to be understood. That obsession can destroy, but devotion can sanctify. That even the coldest marble may awaken beneath the touch of true love. In the end, the myth is not about stone becoming flesh. It is about the way love itself reshapes us, the way longing teaches us to risk vulnerability, the way devotion opens the door to miracles. It is about the eternal truth that when we give ourselves fully, without pride, without restraint, without fear, something within the universe listens. Pygmalion believed he sculpted Galatea, but perhaps it was Galatea who sculpted him. Perhaps it was not the statue that was transformed into life, but the man who was transformed into a lover, capable at last of surrender, tenderness, and awe. And perhaps this is the deepest lesson, that in loving, we are remade. So let us remember as we listen to his story that love is never wasted, even when it aches, even when it seems unanswered. For desire has a way of shaping the world, and imagination has a way of reaching where hands cannot. Together, they hold the power to summon miracles,
to blur the boundary between dream and reality. And if ever we doubt, if ever we wonder whether our longing is too much, whether our devotion is folly, let us recall the sculptor who kissed stone and found lips kissing back. Let us recall the woman who was once marble and became beloved. Let us recall that in the great mystery of existence, love remains the one force capable of animating what lies cold, silent, and lifeless. For love is not bound by flesh or form. Love is the spark that ignites the breathless, the warmth that awakens the inert, the pulse that answers silence. It is the eternal alchemy that transforms longing into communion, imagination into reality, obsession into devotion. Love, whether between mortal and mortal, mortal and God, or sculptor and statue, remains the greatest miracle of all.